Hey there, readers and storytellers, and thank you for joining me on Story Unfolding, a show about changing the world through creativity, ingenuity, and intellectual discourse. We share meaningful conversations with creators, creatives, and dreamers who take it upon themselves to make a difference in the world. We have an influence on the world around us regardless of our intent. The only way forward is by confronting the hard truths, asking the tough questions, and letting your voice be heard. We are better together each day with our human story unfolding. Now, I am pleased to have Trudy Knowles on with me today. Trudy is co-author of What Every Middle School Teacher Should Know, the author of The Kids Behind the Label, an inside look at ADHD for classroom teachers, Radishes and Red Bananas, The Miracle Message published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, Miracles in the Unexplainable, and numerous professional journal articles. Hailing from Westfield, Massachusetts with her husband, Trudy has lived quite the interesting life from world traveling in a VW van to activism in the 60s and is now mother to five and grandmother to four. So, absolutely awesome. Super excited to have you, Trudy. Thank you for joining us. And why don't I know I gave you a big intro, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about you?
Well, first of all, the book is not Red Bananas, which is what you said. It's Red
Oh,
Bandanas.
I am so sorry. Yeah. My son
Radish.
loves bananas, so that's on my mind all the time.
A lot of people say that. So it's radishes and red bandanas. So yeah, I mean it's fun to hear an intro when other people tell about my life. Um, and I'm retired. I'm a retired college professor. Spend a lot of time writing, being in writing groups, playing pickleball, doing yoga, doing line dancing, doing all that stuff that retired people do.
Now, what is pickleball?
Oh my gosh, Michael, it is
I
only
have no idea.
the fastest growing sport in the United States. Oh my gosh, you'll have to look it up. It's played on like a half a tennis court
Mhm.
with paddles and wiffle balls and it's good for the reflexes, good for the
Oh, wow.
cardio.
So kind of
Yeah,
like
you got to look
tennis,
it
a
up.
little bit like tennis.
Um, you don't use a tennis ball. It's a little bit like
I'll
ping pong.
I'll
It's a
have to
little
look
bit
it
like
up.
badminton. It's a little bit, yeah, yeah,
I will
yeah. You'll
have to
have to
look it
look it
up
up.
for sure. Since it's the
Yeah.
fastest growing sport in America, I'll have to check it out. All right, so why don't you tell us a little bit more about your book that's bandanas, not bananas?
um, so I want to start at the beginning of my very first thing I ever tried to write.
Okay, cool. Let's do
When
that.
I was 13 years old. I had just heard that 4 young girls had been killed in a bomb in the bottom of their church in Birmingham, Alabama. And I remember sitting on my bed that night and saying, I have to write this story. People have to remember that this happened. So I am going to write the book. And so I sat down with a piece of paper and a notebook and a pencil and wrote 2 pages, and that was it, because I didn't know anything else. I didn't know their life story. I didn't know anything. But I remember that and thinking how important the written word is,
Mhm.
and how we can use the written word to remember. And so that was kind of the beginning of my writing. And then I wrote on and off and on and off, how we all dabble in bad poetry when we're younger and that kind of stuff. But in about 1982, 83, I was working with a group called Cumberland Countyans for Peace. We were living in Tennessee at the time. And um, we were about 10 years out from the end of the Vietnam War. And I just remember thinking, we are still marching for peace. We're still marching for an end to war. What is wrong with people? And realizing that the Vietnam War really shaped my entire life from the time I was, aware of it in high school all the way through college and beyond. That was the event. Every single male that I knew, my brothers, my cousins, my friends, my lovers, my boyfriends, whatever, were threatened with being drafted. And I could march and I could do whatever I want. I wasn't going to be drafted, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
fun. We're in these marches. But here we were 10 years out, and I thought, I wanted to write a book about the impact that the Vietnam War and the protests and the draft had on my generation, and particularly on women. I wanted it to be from a female point of view. And so I wrote it. I had young kids at the time. I would get up at 5 a.m, right before they woke up. There's an interesting story about that. I decided to get one of those coffee makers, that you could set like for 5 o'clock in the morning, so you'd have coffee when you woke up. I was all excited that first morning. I get up at 5. I forgot to put water in, so there was no water. So the next night I was sure to put water, and I woke up the next morning. I had not put the carafe under, and there was a pot of coffee on my floor.
Oh,
so no. Anyway, that was those was the first 2 days of my coffee maker. Anyway, so I wrote the first draft. It was pretty bad. Then I decided to go back and get my doctorate, taught in high, and put this manuscript in a box, carried it with me everywhere I moved, got my doctorate, started writing professional books, my education books, journal articles. And about 10 years ago, suddenly went, I want to finish that story. That story was still with me. And here we were now 40 years out, still marching for peace, still having riots, still having war. So I read that first draft, and it really, honestly, was terrible. The dialogue was like, what do you want for breakfast? I want toast. Okay, I'll make it. That was the kind of stuff I was writing. It was terrible. I joined a writing group. I got a writing mentor. I decided to really learn the craft of writing. And it took me a long time. There's a lot. I edited and sent it out and read it, and people read it and edited again. It changed form a lot. And I think what the real message of the book is your voice matters. Your voice matters. And when you see an injustice, you have to speak out. And even though you think my one voice doesn't matter, it does. One voice becomes 2, becomes 20, becomes 1 million, and that matters. One plastic, saving the climate. So one plastic bag at a time. Well, what's one plastic bag? But if everybody did it, now suddenly we're saving 2 million bags a day, So your voice matters, your action matters, and you have to speak out even when it's hard, even when people aren't listening. You have to keep speaking out. So that's what the real message of the book is. The message is also, I love Hallmark movies, right? So you got to have a love story in there somewhere. So the love of family, the love of friends, the love of people, that's what gets you through the hard times. And so that's the other message of the book.
That's wonderful. So is this book fiction or nonfiction?
Well, it is oh gosh, it's fiction. Okay. It's fiction. It's historical fiction. So the events that happen in the book were, I either experienced them personally, so there's some truth in what I wrote, but or I researched them very deeply in order to get the historical accuracies.
Okay. So fiction heavily influenced by real life.
Yes. My children won't read it because they see me as the main character. I can't believe you did that, Mom. I said, I didn't. This is a fiction story.
This is all in my head. This isn't actually me.
Right. No, I see you when I read it. I said, okay.
That's awesome. And yeah, I'm really good friends with one of your daughters. So we've had these conversations, and I absolutely, it's hilarious to see that perspective coming from her and then hearing it from you. I know. So for those of you just tuning in, Trudy did a written portion of this interview prior to this video recording. So you can find that over on my website at michaelkenrybooks.com. And you'll see all the answers in her words, exactly as she wrote them over on the blog. And I know I was reading through it, and I was, picking out little things that I wanted to tease your daughter about. I was like, I don't know if this is, should I tease you or should I not? Like, this is hilarious. This is absolutely awesome.
So what were they? What were the things you were teasing my daughter about?
Let's see. What was the thing? There was, I know, I think you were talking about traveling the world and being in a VW van and just tell us more about that experience, because I think that's where it was. I don't remember exactly what it was I was trying to pull out, but okay. I know it had to do with that experience.
Okay, so this book Radishes and Red Bandanas takes place at Lake Forest College in Illinois. It's about 30 miles north of Chicago. And I use that setting because I went there. I went there for 3 years.
Hmm.
And it's near Chicago, and that was really, the scene of a lot of protests. But the junior year, spring of my junior year, I went over to Athens because my college had a program in Athens. And so I went with a friend, went to Athens. We were going to travel. I was going to go back and finish my senior year. But fortunately, I ran across what can I say, a sexy, cute French man who convinced me with 3 other people to get in this VW van and drive around the world. I never considered what happens when you get to the ocean, but, we were going to drive around the world. So we got in this van. We went through Iran, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, none of which you could do now. The other 3 left in Afghanistan because the van kept breaking down, and they got tired of waiting for the van. Afghanistan, we finally sold the van, went to Pakistan, India, Nepal, Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, stayed in Australia to make some money, South Pacific, Panama, back to the United States, back to France. And then I got pregnant and came home, and hence, my daughter.
That's amazing. What a really interesting story. I'm curious, with those travels, I'm sure it influenced you as a writer, but how did that perspective, because was that pre or post Vietnam when you were moving, or was that during?
That was during Vietnam. So it was 70. So Vietnam was over like 73, 74, something like that. So this was 70 to 72.
So how was the kind of like cultural experience different when you were traveling in those countries in America?
Well, everybody across all of that world was very kind, very wonderful. It was easy to hitchhike. It was easy to have people pull you off the street and give you food. I mean, the world is absolutely amazing. The people in the world are absolutely amazing. Um, I really got a touch though when we were in Australia. I was working in a cafe, and there were a lot of Vietnam soldiers who came in. They were on their R&R in Sydney, and they just loved the fact that I was from America, had my long
Really?
blonde hair, and they could talk to me, and it was so sad. It was just so sad that if a car backfired out in the road, you could see them jump. But we had a lot of talks. Had a lot of talk with them about what was going on over there, and they said they had no idea what was going on. Somebody told them to do this, and they'd go hide because they didn't want to go do that. So, but most of the trip, I really didn't even think about the war until I got to Australia.
That's
Just
crazy.
trying to
So
figure out
you
how to get.
didn't
Yeah.
it didn't kind of come to a head at all in Southeast Asia when you were down there? There weren't any effects at all?
No, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia was far enough away from Vietnam that you didn't really, no one, I wasn't even aware of it at all there.
So for those of us who haven't, we'll get back to the writing component, but I'm really interested in this. So for those of us who didn't live through Vietnam, I know we're just coming out of, Afghanistan and Iraq, nearly,
Mm-hmm.
2 decades worth of being over there. How's it? I know there's not a draft, but how would you compare the two? Would it similar or
Yeah,
dissimilar?
I think. Well, first of all, the big thing was the draft, right? You got peace marches during Iraq and Afghanistan, but you didn't have that intensity of, you know, I better watch. I better watch out. I'm going to be sent over there to a place where there was no goal, and that was the same thing. You took a town, they took it back, you took it back, they took it back. You bombed their buildings, they bombed the buildings. There was no line to advance. There was, we nobody knew why we were there, and we just stayed forever. So
Yeah.
in that way, it was very similar. And I remember George Bush saying, this isn't going to be my Vietnam. And sure enough, that's what it ended up being.
Yeah, it definitely was. Sad. But so how do you, I trying to figure out how to ask this question, but like, how would you suggest that we, try and make our voice heard? Because there's, like you said, you know, it's not as galvanized as it used to be. There aren't these, massive peace riots and marches and stuff going on. But there's still a lot of major issues that, you probably experienced throughout your life, from, the war
Right.
component to systemic racism to gender issues. How would you recommend, the listeners, make a difference?
Well, can I want to tell you a quick story before I
Sure,
answer that.
sure.
1969, there was a series, the fall of 1969, there was a series of big marches called the Vietnam Moratorium Marches, where we were trying to close down businesses and march and close down schools for the day. And it was huge, millions of people around the country. There are some unclassified documents that just came out recently that said that President Nixon was planning on using nuclear weapons in Vietnam. And those moratorium marches are what stopped him, because he realized how many people were against the war. And so
Wow.
to me, it's just so moving that, in fact, it matters. There are people speaking out all over the place. There are marches, there, women's reproductive rights, the climate marches. I do a lot of now writing letters to the editor, writing letters to my Congress people, my senators. They listen. That a congressperson will sit up there, and particularly you live in Texas. I mean, you need to, and they will count up this number of people are against this in my district, and this number of people are for it. And calling Congress. I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in the government one way or another, but to do that, to get involved in your local politics, go to the school board and speak, go to your city council meetings and speak, write letters to the editor. I mean, I do that all the time, and people think, oh, I can't write, but and in terms of the climate, become very climate conscious yourself. Change your lifestyle, change what you do in order to be, living a greener life. Buy local vegetables and etc. So I don't know. That's
Yeah, just little things here and there really add up, right?
right.
How do you combat apathy? I mean, I feel like that's where a lot of the world is just we're very apathetic, we're very kind of, jaded, and no one feels like it's worth the effort. But you come from a time that like it was, there was a lot of bad things going on, and your generation continued to just push through boundaries. And I'm just wondering, like, what's the difference now? Like, why is there so much apathy now, and how did you guys beat that back?
That's interesting because, I said I taught in higher ed for a long time, and my students would say, oh, I wish we had some issue to march for like you did. Right. When I was a freshman in high school, President Kennedy was assassinated. And when I was a freshman in college, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated. Civil rights. My town was segregated when we moved to my small town in Kentucky in 1960. And my dad was, the schools are segregated, movie theaters, everything. My dad was right there, speaking out. And so you're right that it's easy to turn off the TV and not watch what's going on and just say, I just want to be happy and live my life, right? But it matters. Police brutality matters. This racial reckoning matters. The climate is going to die if you all don't do something. I mean, my generation killed it, but and women's reproductive rights, just women's rights in general. The LBGT, how many letters you add to that community is under attack. They're banning books. People can get involved in setting up a bookshelf in the library called banned books and make sure their library continues to, you know, do one of those little bookshelves out, you know, that you stick in the ground outside in your yard that says these are banned books. Well, you know, you're welcome to. I don't know. There's a million issues to be involved in, and you know, I'm getting older, and sometimes I just want to sit and watch, you know, Grey's Anatomy on TV because you know I can't do it anymore. But you've got young kids. You just have to speak out. Um,
Yeah.
even if it's just making one phone call a week, you know, just so you feel
Now,
like you're doing something.
so you see,
And vote. You got to vote, even though
you
you
got to
might think
vote.
that may.
Yes, voting is huge. That's a
Yeah.
big thing. Yeah. Now you see behind me the title I picked for this, for this episode, Intergenerational Social Activism and a Life Well Lived. I chose that because of, what I know of you, what I know of your daughter, that she's worked for nonprofits and things. And then I was reading through your interview again last night, and I was seeing all that. You mentioned it briefly about your parents, and how did, your lived experience really, you've been through this a bunch already so far in this episode, but I just want to know more about in terms of like your parents and the people close to you. How did that impact you as a activist and you as a writer?
Well, that's really interesting. I come from a long line of ministers. So my dad was a minister. My mother's dad was, her grandfather was, all the way back to William Tyndale, who was burned at the stake for daring to translate the Bible into English. So I come from a long line of rebels, right? Now, my parents, so sometimes if you say, oh, my dad's a minister, it's like, because people know what some Christians say these days. But
Mhm.
my parents truly loved this story of this man who fed the hungry and welcomed the immigrant and healed the sick, visit the imprisoned, loved the unlovable, and worked for peace in the world. They loved that story. It didn't matter to them whether that story was true or not. You know, they love the story, and that's the way they wanted to live their lives. And so that's what I grew up in. My mother boycotted lettuce and grapes in support of Cesar Chavez and the migrant farm workers in the 60s. Like I said, my dad was really involved in integration, racial justice issues in my town. They many times went to the capital of Kentucky, Frankfort, and marched in the peace marches that were there. So I grew up with that idea that my job was to help make the world a better place. And so it was a natural move when I went to college that I would get involved in peace and racial justice issues, civil rights issues at the time.
How
So
did you feed that forward, pass that on to your kids? Were you taking them with you on your escapades, or how's that working?
well, I have a picture of me with Melissa when the teachers at her school went on strike, and we're standing outside the school with a sign. I have pictures of my second daughter in a stroller as we're being arrested in New York City. Of being
Does that go on a
arrested.
record? I don't know.
I don't know, of being arrested and being in jail and having my daughter brought to me so I could nurse her in jail. Um, they they um, they have been on the front lines all the way. Now, are they going to carry it forward with their children? I know that's the language they speak. They believe in the same things I believe in. Um, you know, Melissa's always sending me pictures of, look, here's the rally I'm at or something, and so.
I feel like that kind of falls in line with what you were talking about earlier, just letting your voice be heard and making those small changes, because it kind of, we're a consequence of our environment, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
what we're raised around, the conversations we have, the things we're immersed in and exposed to, really change our perception of the world and change how we, interact with others. Um, so there was a quote that I know I asked you about. Let me see if I can find it about it was that the world is nothing but our perception of it, I believe. something like
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm probably butchering it, but it was a quote that I asked you in the written interview. Oh,
Right.
here it is. The world is, of course, nothing but our conception of it. So I want to hear more about what your opinion is of that statement.
Well, as I recall, I used to always say, our perception of the world, everybody's perception of the world is different, right? Depending on how you were raised and and who you are. And I think I made the analogy in there of if I saw a fight out in the parking lot, if five of us saw a fight in the parking lot, we would interpret it different based on the fact that, I'm the mother of one of the people fighting and somebody else is the boyfriend of somebody who's fighting. We all perceive that differently. I get that. Uh, but recently, I have come to believe that there are perceptions and conceptions of the world that are downright lies. That's not what, that's not true. Donald Trump did not win the election. So when people say, well, that's my perception of the world, that's my conception, that's what I believe, um, just because you believe it doesn't make it true. So that question really challenged me in terms of thinking about um, how people see the world through different lenses, and some of
Yeah,
those lenses
how
are.
do you inspire that change and growth when there's so many that are ingrained in said lie or perception? It's I don't know.
I don't have any idea. I don't have any idea.
Now
And
springboarding this back into writing, so writing and culture, there's a connection there. That's why I have this channel so we can talk about the impact we have with the written word. And you've mentioned it, you felt compelled to write this story, to document it.
mhm.
What do you feel are the lines between fiction and reality, and or are there lines? I know I've had different opinions from different writers.
Well, that's interesting because so much that I hear from people who are radical conspiracists is all fiction. There's no reality in what they're talking about. Um, I think that I had mentioned the story of Paul Revere. We all believe that that story is true, that he went running through the countryside saying, the British are coming, the British are coming. And, and if somebody writes something down enough, people will come to believe it. And so listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. That's what the story is that we believe. And that story is not true, but we've come to believe it because of the written word. And Paul Revere got caught by the British, and they took his horse away. And but we don't teach that in school. So, um, you know, um,
See, I didn't even know that. So
see, because we all think the British are coming, right?
yeah.
And there's so many stories like that, and that's the danger, because as people write something and people read it over and over and over and over again, it becomes true in their mind. So there's this thin tightrope, there's this thin line between fiction and reality. Reality becomes fiction for a lot of people, or fiction becomes reality for a lot of people.
So what do you think for young writers that are watching today? Like, what would they do? They have a responsibility to try and, show a large divergence from fiction and reality between the two, or, I'm not sure what I'm trying to ask. I'm just, what do you think young writers should do to kind of avoid this problem or this danger?
Well, I having nothing to do with that, the first thing young writers need to do is learn their craft. I've been reading and critiquing some novels
Mm-hmm.
that are so interesting in terms of a novel, but the craft of writing is so poor. So don't think that you could just write a novel. I mean, you can just write a novel and put it up and sell it, and that would be it. But hone your craft and really work on that. Tell the truth. Tell the truth in your life. Live the truth. Know the truth. Um, and be authentic in your life. And if you can be authentic in your life, your writing will be authentic. And not everybody's going to agree. There are people that read my book and they don't agree because they wish that the protesters had been shot. because they supported the war in Vietnam, But I hope I was authentic in what I wrote.
That's
So,
amazing. Yeah. So being authentic to yourself and, speaking the truth as best you can.
right.
I think that's wonderful. If there is, I know this was another tough question for you and we're running short on time, but there's so many social issues that we can, make a difference on. But which would you say are the most important, at least to you, that you would suggest people, you want to raise awareness to?
Well, I think the first one I put was the abolition of nuclear weapons. And I've been on the board of an organization called nuclearban.com. See, I don't even know the name of it now. But because the United Nations passed a treaty for the abolition of nuclear weapons, and a bunch of countries have signed it and ratified it. And of course, the countries that haven't are the nuclear powers. We're getting closer and closer to nuclear war right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's really important that people be aware of that issue and not think that nuclear weapons are a deterrent, because they're not. They're just going to destroy the planet. I think the climate is huge. If we don't do something about, just look, it is almost the middle of March and we are having our first snowstorms in Massachusetts. Really, what we had no snow in, the climate has gone crazy and it's only going to get worse and worse. I think that's, I think that's a real important one. And racial issues. Really, what's wrong with people? People are people. The LGBT, the whole thing, women's reproduction. There's just so much. I can't even, it gets overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it gets frightening, because now you've got books that are being banned because, whoa, we can't read Dr. Seuss. He might give us teach kids about the environment or something. So, that everybody's got an issue that you just need to hold on to it and speak out against
Yeah.
any kind of injustice, because there's a lot.
Yeah. What is it? The Lorax, it's all about climate and,
Right.
pollution and
Right.
everything. You
Right.
can't read that.
Right.
But yeah, well, this has been absolutely wonderful. And I know we're running out of time today. So I would love to talk to you for hours and hours, but I don't want to keep you all day long. So thank you so much for joining me, Trudy. How about you tell us, where can we find your books? Where can we find you online? How can people reach out to you?
So I put my website there, trudyknowles.com. My Gmail address is trudyknowles@gmail.com. Is that right? Or is it T-Knowles? I can't even remember.
I'll make sure it's correct down below.
I think it's trudyknowles@gmail.com. And my books are on Amazon. They're on Barnes and Noble online, so you can get them there. I think I sent you the universal link, so there's other places where people can get the ebook also.
Okay. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I will have all those links down below. Thank you so much again for coming. And if there's any, parting words you'd like to give us, what would they be?
Well, first of all, Michael, if you're ever in the Northeast, come visit. I tend to avoid Texas at all costs, but
We're trying to leave as soon as possible.
I would say get involved, speak out, make a difference, and love fiercely the people in your life. Tell them the truth, be truthful, be authentic in your life. But it's just like love. It's so cliche, but that's it. That's it. Love unconditionally and
Awesome.
speak out. That's it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again. This has been a very enjoyable interview for me, and I hope to have you back again. I'd love to keep talking, and I know we can probably do a whole season just you and I talking. So thank you
Yeah,
again.
I could
And
tell you all about my trip around the world if you want to learn.
yeah, I'll have to have you come over on my travel channel as well, so we can talk about that over there.
Okay.
But yeah, for everyone listening, thank you so much for staying on all the way till now. If you liked what you heard, please click the subscribe button down below. I have plenty of other authors and editors and dreamers on here on this channel already, many more to come. And thank you again for stopping by. Read more, write mindfully.